So now we're talking with Brigid Shea, who has had a fairly important role in our community over the years. And so, Brigid, how long have you been in Austin?
Since 1988. The fall of 1988.
All right. And so we have been talking with folks about our town and just a general kind of sense of, can we afford to live here? And what is affordability? And how does it work into our day-to-day lives? And I was hoping you could maybe just kind of talk a little bit about, what does affordability mean to you? Where does your mind go? Is it housing or food or transportation? All of that. And how is Austin in your mind as far as an affordable place to live and raise a family?
It's great because I actually had this very discussion with people across the community for about 3 or 4 months when I was running for mayor this spring. And I would say that it's a very deep concern in the community. And one measure for me, and this was something that I heard quite often from people, is people are worried that they may not be able to continue to afford living in their house and paying property taxes. And I heard, the interesting thing was, I heard this from people across a pretty wide range of income levels. Middle class and fairly well-to-do people were expressing these same concerns. And on top of that, very high utility rates, both water and electric, and the property tax. I think that's something that is just really affecting people. I mean, one person, actually more than one person, but one person in particular I can think of, said she had calculated the number of years that she could afford to stay in her house based on the continual 10%, 10%, 10% automatic, that's the cap, and every year it increases up to the cap, 10% property tax increase every year, so she calculated it out. She said, I know I can, on my income, I can afford to live in my house this many more years, and I don't want to be forced out of my home because I can't pay the taxes on it. So for me, that's a really important aspect of affordability, and I think it's affecting more people than we realize. But the overall cost of living, and I have a particular concern about policies that are sort of under the surface, so we don't even get to talk about them or examine them, that institutionally shift the cost of paying for new growth onto those of us who already live here. It's a subsidy for developers and for new growth. And it's fundamentally unfair, and we have to examine it, we have to have public debates about it, and I think we have to change it.
Well, that is really interesting. I hadn't thought about the shift of the cost.
There will actually be some discussion coming up, and I hope it's really full discussion. I'm actually just writing about it. But every 5 years we redo the impact fee, or we revisit the impact fee, which is the cost of hooking up to water and sewer. It's the bread and butter of a business, of a city. Provide water, sewer, streets, police, fire, that kind of thing. All the surrounding communities charge a much higher amount, legally allowed by law. Austin charges only a fraction of what it actually costs us. And in the downtown, we discount that by 80%. So all these very high-end businesses that move into the downtown, and they don't water their lawns, they don't use water in the same way that residential does, but they're very high-end. And they're getting an 80% discount off an already heavily discounted rate. That's a built-in subsidy that I think is fundamentally unfair. It might have made sense years ago when the downtown was kind of a wasteland. We're long past that point, and we need to revisit it.
And I bet you have thought in terms of how to go about it. How are you doing this? Okay, good. If we go, how do we get started?
Wherever you'd like. Wander around and take in the tables, and there's food around the sides. And
if it's not already out.
No, there's food already out.
Okay.
So welcome.
Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. So the hard question is, do we change it, and if so, how can we, and what does that look like?
Well, I do think there's these structural things that I just talked about, and the impact fee is a big one, but we also have a policy of completely paying for the extension of large water and sewer lines outside the city. In the past, the developers used to pay their fair share of it. But that policy changed in 2009. And now the city pays 100%. So at a practical level, that means that you and I and everybody in town that pays water rates is footing the bill for the $13 million that it costs to run the water and sewer line out to Formula One. Again, in many cases, the entities that are getting these massive subsidies can afford to pay, and they're not. And the policy, I talked about it a lot during the campaign, but we'll see if it'll change. I mean, yeah, you need leadership to do that, to change. And then I think we really have to take a hard look at homestead exemptions. The city doesn't have a homestead exemption. I know it would reduce the income to the city, but I just think that we've got another one of these structural inequities that's built into the way the the Travis Central Appraisal District, the TCAD, evaluates different categories of property. And one of the reasons that residential property taxes have gone up so much is because they have, I think, artificially kept the property tax increases low on commercial property and on raw land. If you look at over the last 10 years, residential rate categories, and there are different categories of property. Residential has gone up 110% in appraised value in the last 10 years. Raw land went down 7%.
So when something goes up 110%, that means it has doubled plus an additional 10%.
Right.
I mean,
and that's part of what people are seeing in their property tax increases.
If you were paying $2,000, now you're paying $4,200.
Yeah, roughly.
Something like that.
Roughly. And people could see it in the growing appraised value of their homes. You know, and people always say, well, gee, the good side is if you want to sell your house, you'll get a lot of money for it. And people are saying, I'd actually like to continue living in Austin. I don't really want to bail out. But if I can't afford it, I'll have to.
And if you sell, where would you buy?
That's exactly it. A ton of people will tell you, I could not afford to buy in Austin today. A ton of people. And that's reflected in their ever-increasing property taxes. So for me, a big measure of affordability is a community where people can actually afford to continue living.
And not be strapped.
Exactly. I mean, I said, I want a thriving Austin where our elders and our children and increasingly our middle-class families can still afford to live, and we're not on that path.
So, Brigid.
What's my favorite color?
When someone...
Hello, darling!
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Hello,
Leslie. How are you?
Okay, so when a friend comes to town that's never been here before, where do you take them?
Barton Springs.
The first place.
Barton Springs. It's like our temple. It's our environmental treasure. And most people are just blown away. I don't know of any other city in the world that still has a clean, flowing spring that people can swim safely in the heart of a major urban area. Yeah, it's our jewel.
Now, there's been a lot of changes lately in Austin, a lot of growth. Can you tell me what you think has been positive about the changes in the growth?
Well, you know, that's always a tough one. I've said to people, including the guys that brought Formula One to town, I really don't think that it's a good fit for Austin. Dallas, perfect fit. But millionaire playboys with supermodels, you know, dropping money and name dropping or whatever all over town, I just feel like Austinites are, you know, have kind of prided themselves on not worshiping at the altar of money and materialism, and yet they're piling it on. I mean, that's what it seems to me Formula One is mostly about, is just like a flagrant excess of everything. So, I know, the fact that all these guys are helicoptering to the race says a lot about, they clearly have way too much money. But, you know, it is nice to have more arts opportunities. I think the growth has brought a vibrancy, particularly in the downtown, and that's what I was saying. I thought policies to bring more people into the downtown made a lot of sense. But after the water's flowing, you stop priming the pump. And we're at the point where we can stop priming the pump. The water's flowing, gushing downtown. So, but I do think that's a great thing. I love the fact that there's so much activity and liveliness in the downtown. It was a ghost town in the past. People forget. It was just 1999 when half the downtown was boarded up. There were no major businesses headquartered in the downtown. And, you kind of had to look over your shoulder if you were walking home from the office at like 6 o'clock. So I think that's been good. And certainly the new people bring a lot of talent and a lot of really interesting ideas. I love all of the new food movement. To me, that's just been a beautiful thing that's blossomed in Austin. But it was also something that our local people really intentionally nurtured and fostered. The whole Sustainable Food Center, years ahead of its time. You can pinpoint the people and the institutions in Austin that have really helped give rise to this incredibly fertile local food movement. So I think those are some of the really cool things about the Grove.